what's really interesting is the sports entertainment is starting to become very much so much media driven. Like drone footage, I've seen that in the NFL. That's crazy.
Yeah.
You get players mic'd up now, so you can actually hear them as they're running. There's a Japanese fella. We'll get into the proper show in a bit. There's a Japanese fella on TikTok. Literally, he plays semi-pro, right? But he wears a GoPro on his head. And his entire TikTok is him playing first-person shooter scenarios. He's running around doing crazy excitement, mate. Crazy excitement because you're literally right there. And yeah, that's the future of sports entertainment, in my opinion.
And they can all broadcast it themselves, right? And maybe there's a licensing platform down the line there for individual content, for those. Because there's the difference, right? You used to have player cam. Do you remember player cam? Where it would focus in, you'd be able to watch that one player throughout the whole thing. Where did that stop?
Think about boxing. Imagine if you put cameras on Daniel Dubois' gloves, and you could do that. You could see that sort of fly in. That'd be craziness, mate.
Yeah, it's or featherweight boxers, but it might be a bit of a show to keep up with that. Watching flurry back in, flurry back out. We're coming up to a scheduled allotted go live time. I can see we've gone live already. So as people are coming in, maybe we just hold this lovely chat for the next 60 seconds. But I don't think this is what people were expecting coming into this.
But just quickly, hung on the mic'd up stuff. Now that I spent a bunch of time in America, I'm obsessed with American football now. And it's crazy to hear the quarterbacks mic'd up. It adds so much more. And NFL works, right? It's very stop-start. It is the perfect setup for it. But it's the insight you get, and it doesn't feel like they're showing up for it. A bit like you were saying, Sam, about Arteta. It's actually, no, this is real. And there's a guy who's on, I want to say, the Browns, and he's a big personality anyway. And then him mic'd up is just hilarious. So yeah, it's a lot more engaging to see as a fan watching it.
Right, I'm going to take my role here as host and moderator with you two gentlemen, and we're going to need to move into some actual subjects, the actual reason why we're here today. And I'm going to try and keep it together as we go through. But for those of you who are joining us already, if you can just throw something into the chat, let us know that you can see us, hear us. That's always a good hygiene factor, because it'd be super awkward if we did this for the next 30, 40 minutes and nobody could. So we'll kind of wait until we get a thumbs up there in one of the LinkedIn chats, assuming that's going to happen. So thanks everyone who's joining us today. We're going to be doing a little bit of crystal balling, looking into 2025, seeing the trends which are coming down the line. But we're also spending a bit of time about the trends which have come to fruition that many were predicting a couple of years ago that really started to snowball last year, which was primarily this kind of deluge of applications in incredibly high volumes, creating an incredibly difficult moment for organizations to find the right talent. So we're certainly going to start that conversation there. We're joined by Hung today, who's going to come along and pop that internal hackajob bubble. We think we've landed on something which speaks to that and solves that challenge. But yeah, more than happy to kind of take questions from the room, take questions inside. And Hung's going to stop that echo chamber as we go. So without kind of further ado, let's kind of spin round just for people who don't know the people in the room. I'm Sam Berthoud, VP of Talent Solutions here at hackajob, working with customers across the customer lifecycle. And I'm joined on the hackajob side by Mark. And maybe you can do intro to yourself and intro to hackajob as well.
Yeah, awesome. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask. We are live on LinkedIn and I'm trying to repost it on LinkedIn. But my name's Mark. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO here at hackajob. For those of you that aren't familiar with hackajob, we're a global online hiring platform focused on tech workers. So we predominantly work with larger organizations and with their internal TA teams as a direct sourcing platform across the US, India, and the UK. Recently announced our outcome-based pricing model, which we're going to be talking about today, and also have hackajob on Demand, which is our contingent hiring platform.
Awesome. And for anybody who's literally just been sleeping with their eyes closed for their entire time working in TM recruitment, just in case people don't know who you are, Hung, over to you, buddy. Short intro.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Hung Lee. I still self-identify as a recruiter, even though it's been probably 2 decades since I actually sent a CV in anger to anybody. But yeah, basically work in recruiting. I still think of that. I'm probably more like a media person these days. So I do a newsletter, I do a podcast, do events. My job, I see it as just trying to make the recruitment ecosystem as healthy as possible, get people connected and get conversations going on things that we care about. So delighted to be here, guys.
Yeah, and your Brainfood tour is on par, I think, this year with the Eras tour in terms of total cities covered, air miles, visibility. You said in the build up to this that you're overexposed. I don't think that's the case. You've got a view from the world that you're bringing into this, and you're going to be popping those bubbles, challenging those pieces. And we're coming to you for a crystal ball moment with Hung Lee, and I know you've got one just behind you, just out of camera shots. So we'll bring that to the fore when it comes. But I think let's start with, I suppose, the thing which we saw in 2024, right, which is this unbelievable increase in the volume of applications, and the labour market had shifted. There are a number of kind of factors which contributed towards it, but we're now seeing, as unemployment drops, application numbers continue to increase. As the number of people actively in employment increases, and the number of people actively seeking jobs decreases, the number of applications still increase. There was a great study last week, pretty comprehensive, and it's now saying there's 260 applications in order to get a job. There's whole Reddit communities, a bit like the dating thing, where there's diagrams of 700 applications. This is how many I spoke to. This is how many interviews I had, and it's a shocking trend, driven by a number of factors and something we've spotted. So I think, Mark, kick us off. Let's talk about our response. Let's talk about outcome-based pricing, the whole bit.
Yeah, and maybe just setting the scene of what are some of the drivers behind such an increase in applications, right? And I think there's a lot of talk around AI. I think we should take a step back before that. And, LinkedIn's one-click apply and everyone pushing one-click apply seemed like these brilliant candidate experiences. It's like you've gone from these, application forms that took 10 minutes to complete, so now you just click one button and apply. The challenge is everybody clicks that one-click apply and you end up with this problem of noise. You then layer in some of these tools that have now been created where, you'll use an LLM to rewrite your CV or resume based on a job description and then hit one button and it will apply to 200 jobs with customized resumes per job. That's a real practical challenge for people to solve. And often, Charlie Munger had a brilliant line, right? Show me the incentive and I'll show you the behavior. And so actually look at some of the big players in our space and what is their incentive? Well, a lot of these businesses are charging on a cost per click or cost per apply basis. So it's in their incentive to drive as many clicks and as many applications and not really care too much about the relevancy of those applications. And to be clear, that was a much better model than the first online recruitment model where you would just post a job ad and pray people applied for it. But we think that where technology is going is there's an opportunity to really align the value a vendor delivers with the value that a company wants. And so 2 weeks ago now, we released outcome-based pricing where actually customers leveraging hackajob will now only pay for a qualified candidate. And a qualified candidate is somebody that is signed up to hackajob with one account, so they can't customize their resume or profile for every job they're applying for or getting matched with. They've been qualified on salary, visa, location, job preferences. They've been technically validated and matched using hackajob intelligence. And really importantly, the company wants to speak to them and the candidate wants to speak to the company, right? So actually qualifying intent and interest. And that feels like aligning interests in a much better way between a vendor like us and companies, whilst also, thinking about the candidate experience, because the job search is tough. Those Reddit communities exist for a reason. And we shouldn't forget that. It's very easy for us to sit here and be, we're bored of reviewing 500 applications. Well, they're real humans applying for those jobs. Sometimes it's bots, yeah. But, generally there are some humans behind that. And actually, how are we building tools and technologies to improve that candidate experience? So that kind of tees up my view on where we're at and, some of our reactions to it more recently.
And I think just to add a little bit of context there on the tools which are doing that auto apply. Yes, there's been a lot of coverage for that. There's actually ATSs now, right, for candidates. To throw that around the other way, just to bring it into perspective, the volumes that people are working with, they're having to build, or tools are being built and adopted for people to manage the volume of processes they are in, not the volume of candidates, the other way around, which I think is a real stark shift. And Hung, you're here to burst that bubble. In terms of outcome-based, that move to it, we're doing it in isolation and in technology. How much broader do you see this from the conversations, from your Brainfood tour this year? What else are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the the evolution of how companies charge for recruitment is just so fascinating to observe. I mean, rewind back, let's say 14 months or so, the transition seemed to be moving from cost per click to cost per apply, let's say. Indeed, big driver of that. And by the way, so the evolution of job advertising, first it was duration based, so you're just chuck an ad out there, 30 days, whatever happens, that's your cost. Then we thought, actually, no, we're going to go on how many clicks you get, and then that goes up or down based on clicks, and maybe you can moderate it. And then people saying, actually, no, clicks are useless. We actually need genuine applies, not just random people clicking. We need motivated people applying. And indeed, of course, rolled that out to really negative effect. It has to be said, like they actually sort of rolled that back because of the bad backlash they had, typically because too many people applied. And that cost, suddenly the advertising cost sort of scaled up without the control of the people posting it. It was terrifying for employers. I think Indeed were unlucky. They basically built that out with the view of, we're still in the candidate short market. We're not going to get that volume. But it so happened that product roadmap kind of crashed heavily into the diverted timeline that we've all been on since 2020, end of 2021, early 2022, which is really just a big change. I think we're recognizing now that it's really a fundamental break with the world that we thought we were going to have to a different type of world where cost of business is higher, harder, sort of economic growth is lower. There's many more people looking for work genuinely. So there is like actual real human beings motivated looking for work. But then you layer on top sort of the mainstreaming of AI, which by complete coincidence, in my opinion, arrived more or less at the same time as these other trends, which has really enabled candidates to scale up their personalized applications. And the reality of this, I think the end game of this is that it makes it impossible for traditional hiring funnels to really survive personalized mass apply. I call it it's almost equivalent of a digital denial of service. If anybody sticks an ad out these days without sort of having some automated filtration solution, your system is going down, your email is going down. Like you cannot use your email because of the volume you can expect. So yeah, we've got to change how we recruit. A lot of the things that we used to do pre-AI, pre-2021, we need to try and reinvent.
And it's not just that value extraction at the top of the funnel, right? In terms of the advertising cost of bringing in the volume of candidates, it's the human cost on both sides, right? It's human cost for candidates, candidates that aren't being AI enabled in order to apply for jobs are at a disadvantage. So they're going to increasingly use it because if you need to apply 260 times to get to a job, what a difficult experience that is for the individual. And then on the flip side, for recruiters, you're dealing with this volume of applications and you've got this commitment, right? We spend a lot of time over the last few years talking about our commitment to candidates, candidate experience. Everybody should hear back. Like, do we feel that needs to change, that experience? Like, if you call it a candidate experience charter, like the way in which we should respond to people if we're a consumer-facing brand, etc. Like, do we need to change what that relationship is at that top end of the funnel?
I was chatting to the legend Jerry Crispin yesterday on this topic, and we were talking about the fact that you kind of get stuck in this loop, right? To your point, Sam, if you're not an AI-enabled candidate right now, you're at a disadvantage. And I actually think the key thing is transparency. Hung, you talked about, we're going to have some level of automated ranking or screening of applications. It's just going to have to happen. It isn't possible for us to go and, see this many and review this many applications. So I think candidates should be really upfront around the tools they're using, and companies should be really upfront around the tools they're using, because effectively it's AI agent speaking to AI agent for the first few steps. And at some point there's going to get a human involved in that process, right? And, we were chatting with one of the largest retailers in the UK recently, and they were saying, we're just not believing we can solve the problem of either fake CVs or this volume of CVs. Instead, anybody that applies is going to go automatically into an AI interview. And actually, that's quite exciting, because you can get a lot more you can get a lot deeper into somebody and understand somebody's drives and behaviors than you can on a CV anyway. And then from there, they're going to rank the candidates. And I think that's the sort of evolution that we're going to see. And, ever since I've been doing this for the last 10 years, we've always talked about, the death of the CV, and everyone got excited that Web3 and blockchain was going to get rid of CVs, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a really exciting opportunity to be able to leverage some of these AI interview tools to actually give candidates the opportunity to show that personality, show that drive, show that behavior that you can't really get across in a CV, that creates, almost this three-dimensional profile of an individual.
Should be a premium service you layer on top on hackajob, guys. I don't know who your CPO is, but I think you should totally do that. But by the way, I was a skeptic of AI interviewing until I actually got piped into a few experiences. One of them actually live, Max Armbruster just sprang it on me. And I ended up having a conversation live stream on my phone with a bot he released. It was a job application to a job. Basically, all he did was scrape my LinkedIn and piped it into, I think he had a zookeeper job or something. I just tried to get that job. But it was a really interesting conversation. And that started to change my mind, because I realized, that wasn't that painful. And actually, it was pretty legit in terms of how it was interacting with me. So I think you're right. Basically, recruitment will, in my opinion, will bifurcate. So in other words, the jobs that we want to advertise and we want to push out and then sort of get inbound, we have to meet that with that automation heavy, AI heavy, human light approach, let's say, simply because you can't manage it otherwise. But the jobs will be a bit more targeted, where it's like scarce talent, it's headhunted talent, or whatever, it's known talent that you want to try and grab. That's going to be human heavy, AI light. So that may be two different types of recruiter. But it will definitely be a clear bifurcation. It'll be two different funnels. We're not going to treat the candidates in the same way.
And I think on that, just to quickly build, so just on something that Hung said, like my favorite thing about operating in this environment at the moment from an AI perspective and how quickly the technology is changing is like how often I use the phrase, like, I've changed my mind on that. And to your point, Hung, I was so skeptical of AI interviews. Like literally 6 months ago, I was like, this is not going to become mainstream very quickly, or like it's going to be used in sectors where there are way more candidates than there are jobs, because, it's going to be such a bad candidate experience. But I saw a product recently where I was like, oh my God, this transforms the candidate experience. Actually, this makes the candidate experience better from an AI interview perspective. And actually, I think that through that lens, these tools can be incredible. And understanding where they're going to get used in the funnel, I think, is a really important part, right? It's not like, oh, okay, so an AI is going to decide if you get the job or not. Like, clearly, that's not going to be the case. But that top of funnel engagement piece, I think, is really interesting. Sorry, Sam, to jump in, but I just think that's a really fun thing about the environment we're operating in at the moment.
Yeah, and look, I'm playing the role of moderator a bit, but I can't help but get involved in the conversation. I think that, throw back a few years ago to the psychometric testing, right? There was a big evolution there, big changes in AI, where previously you'd have to have an occupational psychologist walk through the results of your test, right? You'd get the test results back. Somebody would have to relay what that actually meant. It was then really simplified in terms of the type of language. It became a lot more accessible for candidates. And you saw that candidate paradigm shift in experience in graduate recruitment, because graduates applied for a position. Before they spoke to a human being, they'd complete an assessment and they'd get something that came back to them and said, hey, you're not a fit for this role. These are the areas where you're weaker. These are the areas you could improve. And that's a much more valuable experience than an automated email that goes back. And I challenge, I think that's the same that we're going to see with AI-led interviews, is you're going to get a much more valuable experience that's probably going to give you some guidance and make it a bit more relevant as a candidate. I think the challenge, Hung, in your model of like the bifurcate between the two, I like it, and that's where I see it going. But then what happens to this group where you're feeling that it is volume heavy and you are able to serve AI heavy human light, but are you seeing the whole market there? And whether it's a role that you can fill easily or not, are you seeing everything? Like, what's the impact it has on diversity? Like, we can go into AI and diversity. There's a whole nother conversation there, but decouple that. Are you able to see everybody? How can you make sure you're managing that in a, high automation, low human touch? Because you might feel like you're getting the result at the end, but like, is it a bit of a false positive because you're seeing the best of what's in front of you rather than the best of the market?
I think we've always done that, though. There's never been a recruitment process that managed to scan 8 billion people and think that's definitely the right person for the job.
That's coming.
It's not realistic. Well, it may do eventually. You know, once we get Skynet up there, it seems like we're charging forward to that future without any kind of democratic oversight. I hasten to add. So yeah, I mean, we've always had like a limited window of funnel, should we say, of who's in and who's out, and we've eliminated a bunch of people, probably inadvertently, and maybe they maybe deserved it. However, we need to do that because we have a moving situation. If we had to sort of be massively inclusive, the entire planet, the job will have changed by the time we've processed 8 billion people. So we have to, it's called optimal stopping. There's a point where we have to optimally stop, because if we spend longer doing it, the job will have changed such that it's no longer relevant. And in fact, the people at the very top, the first people we spoke to, would have already dropped off by then. So we've always had this narrow view. Now, the issue of diversity, I think, is very important and very sort of critically important for everyone in recruiting. But I can see some easy solves to that. Like you could instruct the AI to ensure that the recommended candidates are representative of a certain population, let's say, if you wanted to do that. And if you collect that information, or you could create like separate funnels to say, look, we're gonna get this amount of people from this demographic and this amount, and different recommendations. Or you could kind of decide, okay, we're only going to focus on this underrepresented group first before we can move on to another group of the majority. So I think there's already some obvious ways in which we could solve this without necessarily saying AI will create a kind of a negative situation. So yeah.
And there was an alert there just going on in your background, to let people know that AI can be a positive thing for diversity in recruitment. It doesn't necessarily need to be the bit, and that obviously the ethical consideration is really, really important. But like actually, it should allow, so much better representation, much better aggregation of data that humans just, wouldn't be able to do without, great resource, great input. Great spend on that front. So that's awesome. I'm just going to canvas people watching us on LinkedIn Live as well. Like if you want to throw questions in as we're going, throw some questions in. If you want to kind of garner some thoughts, and we can kind of throw it around in the group here. I think when we're looking at this in the next phase then, so this is one of the trends that we've seen happening over the last few years, right? I'd argue this has been happening since cost per click, cost per application, like the volume of applications per role has consistently gone up. There's probably a bit of a, I suppose, shift in people's mentality when we think about the vanity metrics of recruitment, right? I always remember there's a grad recruitment company that I was working with a number of years ago, and it was how many applicants could we get? The volume of applications told the story of how successful the campaign was. What do you see that value metric as? Throwing it out to the group, like where should people be focusing now, like their energies and their efforts? Because volume is no longer hard to obtain. Even in harder to fill positions, you can get volume, not necessarily relevant. So where do we see that value metric?
Go on, Hung. I'm intrigued by your view.
I don't have a strong opinion. I think there may still be a value in harvesting a bunch of candidates. So this is in flux. So for instance, we know that if you added up every single sort of company out there that had 100,000 candidate records just sitting around, you're probably going to get millions of companies that have this. Now, right now it's moribund, it's totally useless and probably illegal when it comes to GDPR and stuff like this. However, you can imagine a future where that data becomes suddenly valuable when you have AI that's able to reactivate that and keep re-engaging it. So I see one timeline where it's possible that, yeah, actually volume is great. Let's harvest in, let's bring people in, let's try and create an independent talent pool back in the old, talent community idea. But this time we've got some AI that help us engage those candidates. Maybe that turns into a reality. On the other hand, it maybe data becomes completely valueless. Because it's all AI generated or AI assisted anyway. It's all customized in their own way. So how do we know, we haven't duped a candidate? It could well be, for instance, that let's say I have 2 different jobs. Candidate uses AI to optimize CV or background according to 2 different jobs. I may have 2 records that I don't instantly recognize that are the same candidate. And therefore I may have a bunch of dupes in my system. That is a huge problem. In which case maybe the future is, okay, I don't collect data, but I auto-generate it as and when I need. So the data becomes on demand. So there may be a scenario where we can aggregate data super efficiently and almost create a candidate profile. Is that a CV? I don't know, because the candidate didn't endorse that. But I could create a platform a profile that represents this candidate on the fly based on when I need the job. So in that case, yeah, you don't need to hold the data internally. It's accessible in the open web, so to say. So answer is I don't know.
I love the branching off though into the multiverse, like these two separate timelines. There's probably 50,000 more permutations we could have, but they feel like two highly probable ones. Mark, do you want to come in on this? You look like you did.
Yeah, I'm interested, Hung. I'd love your reaction to this. So I think how we thought about LLMs and AI so far, there's been a lot of talk around like speed, latency, cost, right? Like you want to interact with it and how quickly it can come back. And there was an interview that Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA, did recently where he talked about the O1 model that got released at the time and how actually he sees the next wave and the next kind of real innovation or the next step change in productivity is when you give an AI a task and you say you've got 24 hours to go and think about this task, reason, go and complete it and come back, right? So you completely remove latency from the question. It's no longer this like seconds, I've waited 10 seconds, 15 seconds, etc. And so I was really like pondering that and thinking about how would that apply to recruitment? And if you think about the journey today, and Sam, I will bring it back to your question around value metric, is you think about the journey today, right? Is a recruiter takes a brief from a hiring manager. They will then go out and maybe source candidates, engage candidates, qualify candidates, etc. And that might take, 7 days, 12 days, 40 days. We're measuring that activity in days, right? Not in seconds or hours, like in days. And so actually, is there a world in which we have like real agentic AI workflows, which I think is where a lot of my view has changed, like maybe co-pilots would exist, but maybe there'll be a lot more agentic AI workflows too. And actually you give your agentic AI workflow that brief where it's like, this is what we're looking for. And the agentic AI can combat you on the brief initially. Like you have that, actually I've gone and mapped the market and what you're looking for, there's only 100 of them. So, you have that real-time kind of refining of the brief. And you say to the agentic AI workflow, you've got 24 hours to go out, find the most relevant candidates, engage those candidates, confirm they're interested in working with us, get their availability for the hiring manager. And in 24 hours, the hiring manager is just going to see 5 candidates that meet their criteria, that have been qualified, that have been screened, that are ready to interview, that can just get booked in. And to then bring it back to the value metric, Sam, actually completely flip it on its head. And it comes back to like the old agency metrics of like, 3 CVs submitted to 1 hire or whatever it may be, right? Do you actually go really down into very specific volume and quality? And to use Hung's paradigms he described earlier, this is clearly in the paradigm where hard to fill roles, it's clearly in that paradigm there that you'd use this in rather than where you're going to get thousands and thousands of applications. But could that be the value metric in the future where it's really focused on hyper conversion and you're giving AI a day to go and solve that problem, not it doesn't need to solve it in seconds?
Well, then we're steering into potentially blending the two, where you're capturing as much data as you can externally from the market and then allowing agentic AI to go into your internal systems and select those candidates. I think then you're fraught with a lot of difficulties, right? There's been a lot of major missteps of how that can go calamitously wrong. And I think that's the bit which is missing on all of these conversations, is there hasn't been the major lawsuit that's finished and landed and added the risk element to AI yet. It's all been upside. It's all been growth. And I think that's going to be something which kind of restricts it. We've kind of edged our way into starting to think about next year. Hung, I'm going to come to you first. I don't know if the crystal ball's still in 100% mint condition, but like let's have a look at 2025. What do you see coming down the road? What have you heard so far?
I think it's going to be, and basically we're in the long haul when it comes down to sort of hard yards, right? So this is 2024 is like year 3 of, it's going to get better next year, so to say. Listen, things don't magically happen just because the number on the calendar changes. I think if you look at the overall trend, that the high cost of business, high cost of living is going to be around, low economic growth is going to be there. That paradoxically creates pressure on businesses to optimize for business operations. That ultimately means downsizing. So there's going to be a lot more sort of smaller companies. All of this is not particularly great for recruiting. However, there's always going to be like a countervailing cycle to that, meaning companies that may downsize on aggregate are looking to hire digital skills, looking at AI-enabled skills in order to be able to perform with less people. So there'll be tons of recruiting happening against that flow, but for these high skill, in-demand type functions. I actually looked at some data from Talent Neuron today. Had them do a search on the growth of AI and ML engineers over the last 4 years. It's like this, it's going like this. And that's not, these people aren't just going into data science or software businesses. They're going into big corps because all of those businesses are thinking, you know what, we actually need to get sort of into this AI-enabled business ASAP because we can't carry this type of headcount and expect to be competitive. So from a recruiting perspective, we are going to see continued hiring in those particular areas, and it's going to be really interesting to see how HR and TA play a part in transforming those businesses into leaner, meaner, AI-enabled organizations. It's a journey we all got to be fully on board with. It does ultimately mean though smaller companies on aggregate. The hope is that it might mean we get many more companies emerge from that situation. So instead of 1,000 companies with 100,000 employees, let's hope we get 100,000 companies with 1,000 employees. That's the optimistic case, I think, for 2025.
Yeah, and I think it felt like a news report there in the way that you relayed it back in terms of like the optimism and how we should feel it, but in the most direct way. I think I've been banging this drum for the whole year, right? Every conversation I've had has been the same one, which is essentially you've got to prove your value back to the business, your strategic value back to the organization. And part of that means being on the front foot and saying, like, this is where in my function we can automate, right? We're not just talking about AI here. We're not just talking about like massive technological shifts. Some of this robotic process automation, enterprise grade automation has been working for a while, and those conversations are not happening at TA and recruitment levels. They're happening way above, and they're looking at org-wide resets. And obviously there's talent that comes into that. It's always the same with kind of big revolutions, but how can leaders spend their time thinking about what's the areas of where can I remove the human touch points and add the automation? Where can we add the human value? And maybe we'll come to face-to-face interviews, but I think that's a massive part where we add the human value back in, and a big challenge for organizations now because there's like questions on validity. But Mark, you look like you wanted to come in on that, and I think we go to face-to-face next because it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, I was just, to Hung's point on 2025 and what it looks like. One big trend that we've seen this year, and I've been on 3 customer calls this week that have all said the same thing. I think the tee up for Hung is spot on, that there's still going to be these cost pressures on business. So I think you're going to continually see the offshoring of talent. Those 3 customers that I was on with this week, biggest hiring growth up market for next year for tech is India. One of those companies said the only talent that we're hiring in the UK or the US is data science talent. Everything else is going to India. And so I think that it will be interesting to see. It may be that we have smaller orgs. It may be that actually the same size orgs, but a lot of those roles are getting moved offshore to lower cost locations. And at what point do those lower cost locations stop being so low cost? You've kind of seen this in Poland already, because Poland's just as competitive to hire in as the UK or the US. And so you create that cost pressure and costs come back up. I think coming back to that Jensen interview of NVIDIA, my hope is that, Jensen was talking about how they're leveraging AI internally. And, the question was, is it going to replace people's jobs? And obviously NVIDIA is the fastest growing company in the world. But he was saying, no, we're 40,000 employees today. And by the end of next year, we'll be 60,000 employees. But without all of the AI, we probably would have been 80,000 employees. So it's like we're still growing, we're still adding heads, but actually we're not adding as many heads as we need to, because our teams can be so much more effective than what they could be previously. And it's going to be fascinating to see that go out, because like I said, NVIDIA is the highest growth business in the world. So great, they can keep growing. To your point, Hung, if you've got slower growth, actually is it you're going to remove a lot of heads, but then grow heads elsewhere? Klarna have done this. Their results came out yesterday. They automated 700 customer service jobs, and their R&D spend has gone up 22% this year. I think the report said, we should fact check that, but it was something like that. But the increase in R&D spend is far offset by the savings they've made on the headcount reduction that they've had. And so is that going to be the future organization, where the percentage of your employees that work in tech is actually way higher than what it has been previously, but your overall employee count is way lower because so much is getting automated. And they've gone to the extreme. I think they've built their own versions of Salesforce and Workday internally. They built their own HRIS, their own CRM. They're like, we just don't need this anymore. Like, we can build a lightweight version ourselves. So that's, again, like another really interesting dynamic in terms of, you know, headcount growth and where they end up. What does the org of the future end up looking like?
On that note, I think that enterprises will be doing a lot of building themselves. So there's tech hiring going on, simply because from a security point of view, a confidentiality point of view, it makes much more sense. And generally just a business value point of view. So if you're sitting there and you're leaning on ChatGPT, for instance, as your main sort of thing, what is your competitive advantage compared to anyone else who's using ChatGPT? There's none. You're kind of using the same thing. So where the true value is of business is all of those, all of the bits of data that are locked in different systems, even the unstructured data is floating around in history, sort of years of email and years of Slack and all those chat type things. No one's mining all of that stuff. If it can all be pulled together and you kind of living brain, sort of an organization, that would be super, super, super compelling. But you're going to want to build that yourself. You know what I mean? You're not going to want to use a third party for it. So I think we're going to see a lot more proprietary sort of AI essentially, and that should mean, you know, hiring for those skills, hiring for people who can build that.
And the same way we saw with digital transformations, right? Organizations that were behind on that curve, you know, wanted to go through their digital transformations to keep pace. I think we'll see the same here as companies build their own proprietary in-house tooling. They see the benefits, you know, the reports come out, we see that generation. How many companies are going to be looking at Klarna right now thinking, you know, we should be investing in R&D, we should be looking at our customer service operatives, we should be taking that data, you know, and kind of running with it. So I think in turn, it does, you know, it fuels this, it's like this cyclical motion of revolutions. They've come around a lot faster in much quicker succession than the ones previous, but there's displacement and sub-jobs and generation in others. It's just how big is that disconnect going to be, you know, in a world of kind of growing population. Mark, you flipped off again then, but I'm going to move on because you didn't jump straight in. So we're moving on. We're moving into face-to-face interviews. I think this is going to be a trend. This is a trend I'm going to see for next year. We're going to see it increasing. We're going to see people coming back into office environments, particularly for final interviews, particularly for, you know, senior positions, because there is a little bit of distrust as we're kind of robots speaking to robots in different parts of the process. You know, particularly seeing it at grad levels and international hiring. When you're hiring offshore, right, we're seeing that trend of hiring overseas. How do you know if people are working remotely, if that's the person or if it's someone else? So I'm throwing it out there. You know, maybe it's all consensus, maybe there's some bubble bursting. Hung, maybe come to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's controversial to say in person and face to face is going to spike up. I think, didn't I see, was it the Talent Labs came up with a survey which kind of saw that face to face was increasing over the last 12 months. That will continue to go up simply because we can't trust digital information anymore. We can't even sort of trust synchronous digital information. I don't know whether you guys saw that video I sent around on the Zoom call where the fella basically had created software which replicated him being in front of a video, but in fact he was just walking around. And it was completely imperceptible. So we're at the point now where anything coming through a digital interface, a screen, we can't really trust as to who's saying it, who this person is, etc. We're going to have to do the human validation somehow. And I think for recruiting, if we're going to recruit this person permanently, distinct from if it's a freelancer, they're just doing a single job where you can test them on the work. But if it's, okay, this person's part of our team, part of our group, we're going to have to do the in-person, which of course has big implications for remote, you know. Remote used to be remote anywhere in the world will be good. I think that holds true for maybe remote only businesses that there's certain companies that have never had an office. That's all well and good. But for a lot of companies where, you know, they've got a mixed hybrid type function, they want to build a sort of an organization, remote probably means that commutable into office now. And that will mean, okay, in-person interview. So We're going to sort of, this is good news for recruiters at the end. I mean, who's going to do that interview? It's going to be a human recruiter. And our job will kind of increasingly become, less about candidate discovery and more about human validation. Is this a real person? Number one. Number two, can they do the job? Is the vibe check right? I think cultural fit, I know that's been like a negative term for, a bad term in our industry for the last 5 years or so. We'll find a new term for it, but we're going to bring it back. Right? Yeah. Rehabilitate cultural fit or not, I don't know. But the same thing, we're going to eyeball this individual and say, look, does this person fit in our company? And we'll call it values add or some other sort of rebranded BS, but it will be what it is. But that requires the human intuition to come in. So, recruiters as cultural guardians, I don't think that's a bad thing. We used to call them bar raisers back in the startup heyday, right? So it may still be, it's a human bar raiser, and that's the job of recruiting to do. So, I see that's a positive thing.
And you hit that bar raiser, gong there. Like, let's go to Amazon, right? It's this concept of the last mile. That's really what this is. Again, it's like, how much of the journey do you expect to be automated and would prefer to be automated and faster and cleaner and more efficient? And then that part which you're expecting, that human connection, when somebody hands you that parcel at the door, it's the same kind of thing here, right? Part of it, the candidates might want that increasing return to work. I don't think the setting of the idea of going for a final interview is a bad thing from a candidate's perspective, because as much as we're talking about not necessarily trusting the candidates, well, what about trusting the employers? What about trusting that side of it? So I think it does serve it on two ways, and look, maybe not controversial as a theme to throw out, but if you said this 12 months ago, definitely would have been right. And it's amazing how quick things shift.
And I think you hit on that, Sam, there. Like, again, I'm really interested in changes that make the candidate experience better, because there's good incentives on both sides to do it. And I believe that it is a better candidate experience to do your final interview in person. You get to meet people in person. You get a much, vibe check works both ways, right, Hung? Like, actually, who is my manager? What is that interaction going to be like? And I think Hung's synopsis is spot on. Remote first businesses are going to carry on being remote. Hybrid, I think, is now commutable to the office, and there's going to be a lot more in office. And you've seen this more broadly, right? Pretty much every trend that happened through COVID has kind of snapped back to what happened pre-COVID. And yes, it's slightly different. Are we going to be back in the office 5 days a week? Probably not. Is every interview going to get done in person? Probably not. But was there some really good stuff that we did pre-COVID? Yes, there absolutely was. And I think the face-to-face interview was a great thing. We ran our first assessment day at hackajob a couple of weeks ago in person. It was an awesome day. Next week, we've got a series of face-to-face interviews happening. And the candidates get to come in and they get to meet 5 different people from hackajob in real life. It's like, great, they're the people you're going to be working with all day, every day, right? Like, do you not want that interaction? And you can do it in person, and you can get it over with in one go. So I love the last mile analogy. I think that's such a great analogy here of like, yeah, sure, let's get the bulk of the work done remotely, right? Let's get the bulk of the work done asynchronously if we can. But actually that final bit, like, awesome. Let's really invest the time, the effort, the energy of getting that bit right.
And I think the commitment we should give to candidates as well, when we're talking about automation and everything else, we should still provide choice. And I don't mean choice in the way, you remember when you used to be able to call your bank or call any of those setups, right? And you'd be on hold, and that was not a good experience. And then it all moved to like, you couldn't find a phone number, right? If you really tried, you couldn't find a phone number. There's help packs and chat services, and it was quite a task to get there. This isn't changing your gas bill or doing any of those mundane tasks. This is the thing that you're going to be doing, for the majority of your waking life, or at least half of it, week in, week out, right? So it's a pretty big decision. And I think the commitment we should have is, as you are automating, still provide those opportunities and make them tangible and make them real and actually accessible to speak to a human being if you want to at any stage of the process, to kind of give that guidance, support, have that kind of human to human connection. Hung, my grenade into that room was poor. Kind of just piffed away in a little bit of smoke of like face-to-face interviews. Absolutely no combat here. So throw something divisive in that you see is coming for next year. What else do you see happening?
A scandal that will just trigger the audience and have them spit take.
That's what we're aiming for here.
Yeah, I don't want to be controversial for controversy's sake. But I will say that the recruiters are going to have to expand scope. Really expand scope beyond the talent acquisition rubric. Like we talk about talent acquisition, and that's always been like an external hiring function. It's like, okay, we'll bring in the talent in from external, growing the business. But if we're confronting a world where actually businesses generally are going to get smaller, then it doesn't make too much sense to think about aligning purely with a thing that grows that goes the other way. What we need to think about as TA is how do we become more of a kind of a talent delivery function. The companies, they want skills and capacity on a time and place, kind of on demand. That's the job. That's what they want. They can't necessarily predict when that's going to be. It's a volatile, chaotic world. What we've got to do in talent is to create a system where we can deploy that talent as and when needed, irrespective of whether it's perm hire, irrespective of whether it's somebody on a platform, irrespective of whatever contractual relationships we have with that function, maybe even irrespective of whether it's a human being. The company just needs that capacity. So I think we need to have a mindset shift. It's going to be an expansion. I think a positive expansion. We need to get away from the narrow scope of external hiring human beings, rather more expand the scope to think talent or really capacity and capability delivery as on the point of when the company needs it. That should lead to a more exciting job for us.
And like doing that truly as business partners as well. So part of the organization that you're in, because I don't know how many Bs we're up to now, the build, buy, borrow, whatever, wherever we reach. But, the most recent one is bot, right? And if we're talking about expanding capacity, expanding the role of talent acquisition into talent delivery, well, talent delivery is not necessarily talent delivery, I'd argue. It's like skills delivery, right? It's project delivery. And can you place that into the business unit that you're working with? So I was speaking to a gent earlier on this year at Sporty Group, and they have their individuals in the business units. The recruitment team are so distributed that they sit in the weekly meetings of the teams in which they serve, so that they hear every challenge, every problem, and then they think about it in a much more holistic way in terms of what that job should look like and what the skills of the individual should like, personality, traits, all of those things. Well, expand that out one more layer above, and talent start playing a leading role in thinking about the considerations we've got, the data that we've got at hand, the availability of automation for this role. Do you need headcount, or does this individual need to be augmented a little bit more? Actually, do we need to look at this process, this technology alongside it? Like it's a stretch. Like we're talking about growth there. I suppose I've just added another couple of multiples to it, but it's potential, right? Because in the same way as you could be guardians of the culture, you're guardians of your ability to deliver. And a lot of that starts with great people, but it's also complemented by technology, right?
Yeah, just to jump in, Mark, but there was a really interesting not fake, but it was kind of a job ad of someone who created this idea of a chief automation officer. And this happened 2 years ago. It's a lady called Steph Smith, really great person to follow, by the way, online. Brainfood subscriber, incidentally. But she was really smart, and I was just looking at the bullet points of her chief automation officer, and there's tons of stuff that talent people know how to do. Org design, job design. It was all about looking at process improvements. If we can get our house in order, meaning that the people function, if we can get that function in order in terms of how we get the automation in, how we keep the human in, we can potentially provide that service internally for the other departments that are also struggling as we are to get to this point. I think it's a really exciting sort of thing to embrace. And then we might as well embrace it because that's kind of the inevitable future. But we're well positioned to take leadership here, which tells me that we should grasp that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think, well, I guess, Sam, one counter to yours, I hope your world comes true, because I love that idea. Like a really distributed talent team inside the functions, inside the orgs. To me, that's like talent at its absolute best. I wonder if we go the complete opposite way. And the hypothesis here is that TA teams are smaller than they've ever been. And with tools and co-pilots out there, hackajob intelligence being one, somebody that is a non-technical recruiter can very quickly become a technical recruiter. And somebody that's a technical recruiter probably needs to learn how to hire salespeople or customer support people. Because actually, I think gone are the days where you're going to build a specialist team of 10 tech recruiters, because, you know, when the market drops again, then, oh God, you know, we're going to lay off 5 people, 10 people. And I actually think if I was a recruiter right now, I'd be thinking, how can I be more of a Swiss Army knife? How can I actually, yes, go deep in some highly skilled, you know, tech roles or whatever it may be, but if I need to, be able to pull off a grad campaign? How would I do that? What tools would I use? What technologies would I use? And you know, somebody said this, and I wouldn't frame it like this, but this is what they said, was like, oh, I thought I was a really shit hot tech recruiter. And what you've done with hackajob intelligence is make an average recruiter as good as me, because one of my abilities was to be able to speak the hiring manager's language and speak the candidate's language. And actually now an average recruiter can do that. And I think they were wrong in using the phrase average. But the point being, do we end up with really small TA teams that can just recruit everything? And it's like, and like I said, Sam, I'd much rather your world comes true. But just with that reality of orgs getting smaller, maybe there's less hiring overall. Is that an alternative reality that ends up getting becoming?
Well, maybe smaller in that sense. But I like that split before, right? Of high intent, high human, low tech, high tech, low human. And I think you'll see teams split between those two. You'll have recruiters that really should be looking at the data, the pull through, looking at all of their sources, what's working, what's not working. Are we hitting our diversity goals? Are we getting the quality of hire through this high tech, low human touch? And then the human touch on the other side becoming even higher than it is now, because the specialism of those roles is becoming increasingly difficult. I suppose the challenge is then maybe the teams doing those two roles, even if they are split, even if the individuals are split in that way, or maybe there's that talent density where they've got the blend between the two. I think that's unlikely. Even where they are split, are talent teams going off and doing other things, right? And I remember many years ago, right, you used to have, there'd be resourcing advisor, talent acquisition manager, talent acquisition partner. And then there were organizations that had 70 or 80 job titles within talent acquisition, right? Specialists doing tons of different roles. And I think that's what we're going to see more and more of. I've seen some fascinating stuff coming out of, you know, the world of talent intelligence and the business value they're driving back. I think those teams will grow. They'll be easier to enable now. So I've got quite an optimistic view in terms of where TA sits overall, but I do agree that businesses will be smaller to drive the same output. I think the percentage size of TA is probably, or hopefully at its equilibrium at the moment, rather than getting smaller from here, because that'd be a pretty bleak way to finish. Let's finish with something positive, a really great thing that's going to happen.
I wanted my hot take that wasn't going to be positive, Sam. Can I give you a quick one prediction for next year that's not positive?
No. Yeah, go on then.
So something that I've really enjoyed over the last 18 months as we've become more global is just seeing different markets, right? US, UK, India, and how things act. And I think it's fascinating to see more broadly the EU's approach to AI and what they're doing and being quite, the Twitter trolls would call it de-acceleration. I think that's maybe not fair, but they're being very, very risk averse. Whereas, you know, I think with Trump in the US, they're going to rip off the Band-Aid and say, let's see what will happen, right? And, you know, I think Sam Altman's probably terrified about that, because I think he was hoping for a very regulated environment to centralize a lot of it. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with AI regulation. So this is my hot take, is AI regulation. By the end of next year, there will be a massive lawsuit by the EU against either a vendor or a company for AI hiring. It won't be in the US, and I don't think it will be in the UK. It will be in the EU. And I think it will completely change everyone's perspective on AI, because we'll get incredibly risk averse. Sam, we see this all the time already. The leading recruitment teams, the leading procurement teams are terrified about AI in hiring already. And I think we're going to see a massive law case by the end of next year on AI, automated decision-making, whatever it will be led by the EU. And it will be, I think, likely against a company, because it will land more if they can do it against a big brand. They'll probably choose one of the big tech guys because they love picking on them. That's my hot take.
Hot take that your hot take isn't actually negative, just quickly, because maybe it's slowing what is a freight train that's just moving forwards. And I think it's kind of needed. And me and Hung spoke about this 9 months ago, and Hung rightly raised that kind of data fortress setup. I think the two of those things combined, the litigation that just hasn't yet happened. And I don't think it's just going to be the EU, right? There's a major case going right now with Shutterstock and the images and Midjourney, etc. There's some pretty big cases that will come out over this next period, not just from well, I was about to call it a nation state, but like from the EU, let's just make it easier. So yeah, I think we're going to see it across the board. And then where are your data centers? Where do they sit? What implications does that have? Does it slow the role of it, at least in the legal permissible world? Hung, hot take
on this. I want to just I want to lean on it a little bit more. I think Mark's correct. There's going to be some litigation. I think there'll be political consequence to it, though. So in other words, I believe that the era of the EU sort of leveling fines onto US tech are gonna come to an end, because that will come at a political price now that Trump is involved. So I think there's going to be an attempt, because the legal system will happen. But then Trump was going to say, all right, then we're going to completely on a different sphere hurt you for hurting us, and then we're going to cave. So the EU caves. That will have a massive implication as to the validity of EU rules. And suddenly we might decide, oh, actually, it's not enforceable, because basically the biggest company that is breaching a lot of these things now is unfinable. And at the end of the cookie banner and stuff like that might occur simply because, or it does become enforceable and we end up sort of having withdrawal of US services to the EU, which, again, is another world potential timeline. Again, I don't know whether that's positive or negative. We don't know. Positive or negative, I can't tell you. I think it's too early to say, right? We're at what point? My commitment is to how to make humanity as a species survive and thrive. So I don't know, whether any of these local situations either promote or deny that outcome. So yeah, interesting to observe as it is anyway.
Yeah, and for those that have stayed with us, and there's a fair few of you that have, I love how we've literally just gone from recruitment and face-to-face interviews into massive geopolitical implications, and then the survival of humankind itself. Hung as we kind of finish. And I don't think we can move on from the survival of humankind. I think it's a great point on that bombshell to kind of wrap up today. And thank you, Hung, for joining us and popping bubbles where bubbles need to pop. Mark, have we got closing statements from the CEO?
No,
this is a special time.
No, not at all. But just, make it a bit of fun, given if people are still here 55 minutes in, they must be here for a good time. I'm going to chuck the question back to Sam and Hung. We have a Man United fan in Sam. We have a Newcastle United fan in Hung. Man United are currently 11th in the table. Newcastle are currently 10th in the table. Hung, I'm coming to you first. Who finishes ahead of who, now that we have the mighty Amorim, come May 2025? Who's higher, Newcastle or United? Or Newcastle or Manchester United?
This is a heart versus head type scenario. Heart versus head. I do think Man United have found the right guy. I think they've finally found the right guy. So I think that's on the up and up. I like the way he's deployed and Mason Mount. That's like getting a new player back. The quality of the team is all over. Marcus Rashford has got a new girlfriend. We all know what that means.
Organised by Amorim as well.
That means, he scores 30 goals every time he's he's hooked up. So when he's hooked up, so I think Man U will do very well. They'll be on their way back. I think they've had their century of humiliation, let's say, and they're going to be a competitor. Listen, great league. Chelsea are right up there. Suddenly back under Maresca. Man City on the way down. I think Guardiola's last year, finished. Liverpool right up there as well. Arteta's there as well. It's a fantastic league. It really is.
What about you, Sammy B? What are you saying?
Look, I kind of feel like this conversation, we started on football, we ended on football. And like we were talking in the pre-game earlier on in the week, we start as crabs, we end as crabs. So what a weird way to finish. But in terms of football, I am such an optimistic United fan. It hurts. Every season since Ferguson's left, I put money on Man United to win the league, even though, heart versus head, there is no calculable way that is possible. But I must say, it is encouraging that when a player loses the ball, another player in the team seems to know what they're doing rather than looking around a bit aimlessly. So that's definitely, there's a system there. And I think it will take at least half a season to find how they play in this setup for other teams, which is always unsettling. A new formation, a new style comes to the league. I think that will just play into our favor. We'll just nip you to that position, 8th in the table. We might just challenge you for it, but maybe not much better than that. There's some great teams, great competitive league, like the competition for talent. So we've done crabs, football, geopolitical situations, and the survival of humankind, with a smattering of what's happening next in tech hiring, outcome-based pricing, and face-to-face interviews, plus more. So, nice one, Han. Thanks for joining, keeping us honest. Great conversation. We'll end it here with a wave. You wave at the end of this? I don't think we do. We just take leave.
Just cut us off, mate.
Thanks, on.
Big
kill. All right, see you later, guys. Great chatting with you.
All right.
Thank you.
Am I still live?